Welcome to the Felonious Scribe. We're your hosts,
Dawn Hosmer
and Kristine Raymond, writers of mystery, mayhem, and murder. And let me just tell you, because I know I'm going to crack up, we have had such a time trying to bring this episode to you. We are on take number 3.
The first time we did the whole episode before we realized we weren't recording. So
yeah,
we are recording this time, so we're good.
We are. Okay, so our question this week comes from the Cozy Mystery Friends Facebook group, and JJ Burns asked, since mystery plots are so complex, is the plot construction process done backwards from end to beginning? With other fiction, it seems that characters take on a life of their own, and the ending is not always known at the beginning of the process. But I would think that mysteries are not that way. So Dawn, since you write thrillers rather than actual mysteries, how does this apply to you? I see that look on your face.
Oh, okay. So, as I mentioned 4 times today in the last episode, I am a pantser. When I sit down to write, I start with one character and one idea, and I just sit down and write. And I'm also a linear writer, which means I start at the beginning and I write in order until the end. Some writers I've heard can just jump around and write parts from the beginning, the middle, the end, and piece them all together. I can't do that. I have to start and work my way through. That being said, combining those two things, being a pantser and writing linearly, when I'm writing a thriller or suspense, many times I don't see the main twist coming until I write it. So for instance, with Bits and Pieces, which is the first book that I had published, it's a psychological thriller. Those of you who have read it will understand what I'm talking about. But the main twist in that story, I did not see coming until I wrote it on the page. And it made me sit back and say, wow, like my mouth dropped, like, whoa, that was a big twist. But then it also made me say, oh, shoot, I have a lot to go back and fix, because things have to make sense for the reader. Like you can't just have a twist come out of nowhere, because then you're going to leave your readers very dissatisfied. So I had to go back and make sure and change a lot of interactions during editing to make sure that that twist made sense. What about for you?
I am like you in that I write linearly. And also, like, because I started out writing romance, I would just kind of sit down and write the story as it came to me. And I kind of knew the plot and what I wanted to have happen and how I wanted it to end, but I really let the characters just take me along for the ride, pretty much. With Finagled being a cozy mystery, I had to have those clues and make sure that I laid them in there in the right places so that they made sense, so that I wasn't giving something away too soon, so that it all came together at the end where the reader could go, oh, okay, yes, this all makes sense. And it was a really different process for me, and it took a lot of work. I mean, and it was fun work. I mean, it was creative work, but when I started writing, I think it was even in the second chapter, I had put something in there, and I'm trying to write after that because excuse me, along that linear sense that we talked about, because I can't, if my chapter 1 isn't solid, I can't write chapter 2. Doesn't matter if I have chapters 3, 4 through on to 12 up here. If I can't get them in order, it just doesn't work for me. And it wasn't coming together, and I could not figure out why. And I kept, bumping up against it. And finally it hit me one morning. I'm like, oh, I put that in there too soon. I shouldn't have put that in there yet. So where I don't really work from the end to the beginning, like JJ asked, I do have to kind of have those signposts along the way, like, okay, this is where I need to stop and add this clue, or somewhere, I need to have this happen. And some of them I didn't even see coming. I it's not like I write them down and say, okay, these are the 6 clues that I need to put in there. It's just, I kind of know that there has to be something to lead to the next part,
And I'm kind of envious of that, because
oh, don't be.
I wish I could do that, because I think it would make my editing process a lot easier. I think though what I do is when I write something and I feel like the characters reveal the twist, I then mentally, or sometimes actually, write it down of all the things I know I'll need to go back and change to make that fit. But something you said that's kind of interesting to me is, I write psychological thrillers and suspense. I'm a full pantser. Well, last year I tried to write a romance. For that romance, I sat down and plotted the entire thing out.
Really?
I could not pants a romance, because I'd end up having someone die, and that's not very good for romance.
I've had that happen in my romances, so yeah. What's wrong with that?
Probably brutally, and lots of people. But I sat down and completely plotted it out. So it's interesting to me that you're like, for you can just pants a romance, but you have to plot a thriller, and it's opposite for me. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. And now, to be clear, I consider myself more of a plantser. I don't necessarily plot to the point of like using outlines, because I hated doing those in school, so I'm certainly not going to do them now. But I do, there is a lot more work, almost, at least for me, that goes into the mystery to make it all work, because you can't have that one thing, and the readers will catch it.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't make sense, they will let you know.
Yep.
And I don't want that one thing that I put in there or don't put in there, and it doesn't connect, that puzzle piece doesn't fit with the rest of it. And now, not all of the clues are something that I planned out, though. There's a for instance in Finagled, where and it's not even so much that I said, okay, it's time for a clue or anything like that. It's just, I'm writing along and this certain situation's happening. And of course it's, like your mind's going and you're like, okay, this would be really cool if this happened. And then that developed into something more, and actually ended up playing a part even at the end. And I mean, that's just kind of the fun part of it, though, too. Yeah. So I like being able to do both.
Exactly. And I think, like, for me, my release coming out in June 2020 is called Somewhere in Between. And it's about a woman.
I pre-ordered.
Thank you. It's about a woman who comes to at her own funeral and is trying to figure out how she died, because she's a 39-year-old healthy mother of 3 who shouldn't be dead. And no, I don't think it was COVID. But it could change it to fit the time. No. But so this whole book, she's trying to figure out how she died, because in the meantime, she's kind of stuck in between life and death. And as I'm writing it, I don't know how she died. That didn't reveal itself to me until I was maybe about halfway through, and I tend to talk through my plot points with my family and just say, okay, here's what's happened. Here's what's going on so far. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And through that talking and then sitting down to write, the twist then came to me. But then what has to happen for me is then I have to go back when I'm editing and look at, okay, if I leave this particular sentence in here, does it give too much away? Like, will the reader, will it be on their radar that, oh, I need to think about it from this perspective? And you really have to analyze every sentence
Word.
to say,
Yeah.
does this give too much away? Does it make it seem believable? Yeah, it takes a lot of work during edit to make sure that all fits together.
Now, we were talking about on version 1 or 2, whichever, that you are more of a get the words out there and then edit afterwards, whereas I edit as I go, because if my chapter 1 isn't solid to me, I can't move on to chapter 2 and so on. And I said that earlier as far as the writing the story, but it's also as far as the editing. If I cannot leave a mistake in there and move on, I can. I've tried, trust me, I've tried, because it's a long way to write. But and that's not to say that I don't go through it at the end and reread it and check grammar and spelling and add a sentence here or word there, change a paragraph. I mean, I do all of that, but by the time I get to my final chapter, up into that point, that book is pretty solid for me.
And see, it's the total opposite for me. Because for me, my editing brain and my creative brain are two different animals, and they are both animals. I cannot do both at the same time because they just take different parts of my brain. And so when I sit down to write, unless I need to refer back to a chapter just to make sure, like now, I haven't written for a few weeks because of all the craziness in the world, and I just can't get there. But so when I sit back down to work on the sequel to Bits and Pieces, I'm going to need to read back through. But I'm going to read back through just to familiarize myself, not to correct. Because if I get started on correcting, I'll never move on. Like I will work on the first 3 chapters and they'll be perfect, but I will never finish the book. And the thing that's interesting to me is I really feel like me writing a first draft is me telling myself the story. And to use Bits and Pieces again, for example, the first 3 chapters I wrote for Bits and Pieces, I ended up cutting from the book because it was me getting to know the character, getting to know her voice. And at some point I thought about, like, if I ever do get a newsletter sign up, which is on my list, giving away those first 3 chapters, because it was really telling for me to get her voice down. And it was kind of like she was talking to me. It started off with the sentence, I am Tessa, and here's my story. And it talked a lot about her background and her family and why out of all of her siblings, she was the only one that wasn't named with a C, and that kind of thing. And it killed me to cut those words because it was really important for me to know that piece of the story, but not necessarily important for the readers to know that piece of the story.
Well, get on the newsletter sign up because I want those first 3 chapters. And I'm so excited that you're writing a sequel. I didn't know you were writing a sequel to Bits and Pieces. So that makes me very, very happy, because let me just tell you guys, Bits and Pieces is an amazing book. I read it. I got to the end, the last page. I closed it. I put it on my nightstand, and I immediately wanted to pick it up and start over again. It is that good. I've actually already read it twice. So it's just, and that's with knowing the twist, because I think that's one of the things when you read like mystery or a psychological thriller or anything like that, when you know the twist, you read the story in a completely different way because you know what's coming. And for me, that's a good thing because you get that much more out of it, I think. I mean, it's just, yeah.
And I do
I
love that about thrillers and suspense. I love a book that makes me get to the end and then either reread it or flip back through and say, does this like, oh, I remember this part. How does that fit in with what this twist was? And make me flip through and actually like try to figure out
right.
how it all works together. Um, and yeah, it would make it much easier as a writer if I knew that going into the story, but that's just not my process. And I I have to learn. I've had to learn to just trust my process, and that is sit down, start to write, and it'll all come together. And doesn't mean that editing won't be a nightmare, because it probably will, but at least get the story down and you can fix it later.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I think it's really important for every author out there, and if there's any newbies out there who are still writing their first books, please listen to this and pay attention. It's really important to embrace the way that you write, to accept it, to love it, to nurture it, because you will hear so many different points of view as far as what you should do, how you should write. Stephen King writes this way, James Patterson writes that way, Don Hosmer writes this way, Kristine Raymond writes this way. You know what? We all get our books out there. And it's just really important to just say, okay, this is how I do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay that I do it this way. Now let me run with it.
Exactly. And I think when I first joined Twitter and the writing community there, I got convinced, I think, that my process was wrong, because so many people plotted and talked about how they could tell the difference between a pants book and a plotted book. And first of all, I think that's just wrong.
Yeah,
I can't.
I don't think so.
I have no idea. Like when I'm reading a book, if this person pants or plotted, I just know if they can tell a story. But I took that to heart and I thought, oh, I need to start plotting. And I tried and I was making myself crazy. Like, I'm like trying to figure out a plot and spend all this time. I'm like, Dawn, just sit down and write. And I did. And that's where Somewhere in Between came from. I just sat down, had that one idea and wrote. We all have to trust our own process. And that process, like you've talked about, may be different from book to book.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Or genre to genre.
Yeah, I found that a lot. I do not write the same way now that I did 6 years ago when I started. And then especially switching genres, I write very differently with the mysteries than I did with the romances. So yeah, just trust your instinct more so than anything else, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And
so let's see those pretty covers, Dawn.
I have 2 books out now. One is The End of Echoes, and I know a lot of
the twin.
A lot of people like Bits and Pieces better. This is my favorite book that I've written, though. Like, this is the story of my heart that I needed to tell. It's an emotional read, but I think the people that have read it have enjoyed it. So that's End of Echoes. And Bits and Pieces, yay, 20. Bits and Pieces is a psychological thriller. It's pretty twisted. Both of my books are available on audio, ebook, paperback, and hardcover. And I'm Somewhere in Between is currently on pre-order through my publisher. And I just this week found a narrator for the audiobook, and
oh, yay.
I'm really excited to see what she does. So I'm hoping I can release the audio at the same time as I release the others in June.
Cool.
So what about your books?
Well, Finagle's My Cozy Mystery.
Oh, upside down.
Upside down.
I got a twin.
And it's the first in the Finn's Finds mystery series. I am working on book 2. I've been working on book 2 for 9 months. But as we just talked about, I mean, the story can be here, but if it's not here, I can't do it.
Yeah.
So, but I have added to it, and it will be out, I promise. But in the meantime, you can pick up Finagled, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iTunes. You know, it's available everywhere in ebook. It's available in paperback. It is not on audiobook yet, but I'm hoping that changes very shortly. So, yeah, that's what I've got.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in. That's all that we have for this episode of the Felonious Scribe after 3 attempts. Join us next time as we continue our exploration into the dark and twisty side of writing. And remember, life's more interesting when you add a little mystery.
If you have a mystery thriller question that you'd like us to answer or talk about, discuss, whatever word you'd like to use, please click on the link down below and submit it, and we will be happy to get it on the air.
And everyone, please stay safe out there. And
yes,
we'd love to hear your comments or your questions. You can either submit on the form below, or if you'd rather, reach out to one of us on social media and just tell us what your questions are. We'd love to answer them.
Absolutely. And feel free to leave a comment on the show, and be sure to subscribe so you know when the next show comes out.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.